Imagine this. You walk into a dinner party and witness the host making out with his teenage male lover, while his wife sits across the table, completely unbothered, probably planning her own rendezvous with the young lassie sitting across the table later on. Sounds like fiction, or something out of a twisted movie. Well, buckle up, because I'm about to blow your mind with some historical facts that would make your super-conservative uncle have an absolute meltdown. In ancient Rome, the empire that gave us roads, aqueducts, and the legal system we still use today, homosexuality wasn't just accepted, it was expected. We're talking about a civilization where sleeping with men was considered so normal that not doing it might actually make your friends think that there was something wrong with you. While politicians today lose their careers over sexy messages and sending the odd dick pic, Roman emperors were literally building cities to honor their dead boyfriends, and nobody batted an eye. Today, we're diving into a world so sexually liberated, it makes modern-day Amsterdam look like a Mormon summer camp. Welcome back to Ancient Rome Revisited. I'm your host, Marcus Aurelius, and believe me, as one of Rome's greatest emperors, I had to deal with more dicks than I care to admit during my time in the Senate. And I don't mean just phalluses. God, some of the senators were really big dicks. Anyway, don't get me started on the Senate. Let's get back to why homosexuality was completely normal in ancient Rome, shall we? Before we begin, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, then please do so now. That way, you'll never miss another episode of Ancient Rome Revisited. Okay, let me start by setting the stage for you. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither were its sexual norms. Let me paint you a picture of ancient Rome that's probably nothing like what you learned in school. Forget the glorified Hollywood versions with the likes of Russell Crowe defying an emperor. Everyday life in ancient Rome was messy, complex, and absolutely fascinating when it came to sexuality. We're talking about a civilization that spanned over 1,000 years, from roughly 753 BCE to 476 CE in the West. That's longer than Christianity has existed. During this massive timeline, Roman attitudes toward sexuality evolved. But one thing remained remarkably consistent. They didn't categorize people as gay or straight the way we do today. To Romans, that would have been like categorizing people by whether they preferred wine or beer. Sure, you might have a preference, but why limit yourself? The Roman approach to sexuality was fundamentally different from our modern Western perspective. They didn't think in terms of sexual orientation as an identity. Instead, they focused on sexual roles and social power dynamics. It's like the difference between asking, "Are you a top or bottom?" versus, "Are you gay or straight?" The Romans were firmly in the first camp, and honestly, it probably saved them a lot of anxiety about labels. The Golden Rule. It's all about who's on top. Here's where things get really interesting, and where Roman society shows its true colors, both progressive and problematic at the same time. In Roman culture, homosexual relationships were completely normal, but they came with a very specific set of rules that reflected their obsession with power and social hierarchy. The key principle was simple. It was perfectly acceptable, even expected, for a Roman man to be the active partner, what they called the insertive role, with anyone of lower social status. Think of it like a power dynamic you might see in a modern workplace. The boss can make certain moves that would be inappropriate if the roles were reversed. So a Roman citizen could have sexual relationships with slaves, freedmen, or foreign-born individuals without any social stigma whatsoever. In fact, It was seen as normal masculine behavior. Roman men were expected to be sexually aggressive and dominant. It was part of their identity as conquerors and rulers of the world. But here's the plot twist that would make any soap opera writer jealous. It was considered deeply shameful for a free-born Roman citizen to be the passive partner in a same-sex relationship. This wasn't about the gender of your partner. It was about maintaining your social and political power. Being penetrated was associated with being conquered, dominated, feminized. And in a society built on conquest and domination, that was social suicide. The mentorship model, ancient Rome's answer to life coaching. Now, before you start thinking this was just about hooking up, let me introduce you to one of the most fascinating aspects of Roman culture, the mentor-student relationship that often included sexual elements. This wasn't grindr in togas. This was a sophisticated social institution. Wealthy, established Roman men would often take young men under their wing, providing them with education, political connections, and guidance in navigating Roman society. These relationships frequently included sexual intimacy, but they were seen as mutually beneficial partnerships rather than exploitative arrangements. The older man, let's call him the mentor, gained prestige from having an attractive, intelligent young partner who reflected well on his taste and influence. The younger man, the student, gained access to education, social networks, and political opportunities that could set him up for life. It was like having a really hands-on career counselor, if you know what I mean. These relationships were temporary by nature. They were expected to end when the younger partner came of age and began establishing his own career and family. Think of it as ancient Rome's version of a gap year, except instead of backpacking through Europe, you were learning rhetoric and politics while being mentored by a powerful senator. The cultural significance. More than just physical touch. What made these relationships so culturally significant wasn't just the physical aspect. It was their role in Roman social and intellectual development. Remember, this was a society that valued education, rhetoric, and political skill above almost everything else. These mentor-student relationships were seen as crucial for developing the next generation of Roman leaders. The sexual component was viewed as part of a deeper, emotional, and intellectual bond. Romans believed that physical intimacy enhanced the learning process, creating stronger connections between mentor and student. It's like they figured out that the best way to really get to know someone and learn from them involved every aspect of human connection. This wasn't just theory either. Some of the greatest names in Roman history were products of these relationships. Julius Caesar himself was rumored to have been involved in such arrangements, both as a student and later as a mentor. The phrase, "every woman's husband and every man's wife," was famously applied to Caesar, referring to his numerous relationships with both sexes. The rules of engagement, Roman sexual etiquette. Roman society had incredibly detailed rules about sexual behavior that might seem bizarre to us today. It's like they had a whole handbook of sexual etiquette that everyone was expected to follow. For instance, it was perfectly acceptable for a married Roman man to have sexual relationships with male slaves or prostitutes. This wasn't considered cheating because it didn't threaten the legitimacy of his children or his wife's honor. But if he had an affair with another man's wife, that was a serious offense that could lead to exile or worse. The logic was purely practical. Roman marriage was primarily about property, inheritance, and political alliances. As long as you weren't messing with someone else's property rights or bloodline, you were good to go. It's like they separated love, lust, and legal contracts into completely different categories. Male prostitution was also completely legal and socially accepted in Rome. There were male brothels, male escorts, and even male porn stars, called actors, in theatrical performances that were, let's say, more interactive than your average Broadway show. The only requirement was that free-born Roman citizens couldn't work in these professions. That was reserved for slaves and foreigners. The emperor's new clothes, power and sexuality at the top. If you really want to understand how normalized homosexuality was in ancient Rome, just look at the emperors themselves. These weren't people who had to hide their sexuality or worry about political careers. They were literally the most powerful people in the world. Emperor Hadrian, who ruled from 117 to 138 CE, was famously devoted to his young male lover, Antinous. When Antinous died tragically young, possibly by drowning in the Nile, Hadrian was so grief-stricken that he founded an entire city in his lover's honor and had him deified as a god. That's not hiding in the closet. That's building monuments to your relationship. Emperor Trajan, considered one of Rome's greatest rulers, was known for his relationships with young men. Emperor Titus had a famous relationship with a young Jewish prince. These weren't scandals that brought down governments. They were just part of the emperor's personal lives that everyone accepted as normal. Even Julius Caesar, before he became dictator, was rumored to have had a relationship with King Nicomedes of Bithynia during his youth. His political enemies tried to use this against him, but not because homosexuality was wrong. They attacked him for allegedly taking the passive role, which would have been seen as unbecoming for a future Roman leader. The religious angle, gods, goddesses, and gender fluidity. Roman religion was remarkably flexible when it came to sexuality and gender. Their gods regularly engaged in same-sex relationships, changed genders, and generally behaved in ways that would make conservative religious leaders today absolutely lose their minds. Jupiter, the king of the gods, famously abducted the beautiful young man Ganymede to serve as his cup-bearer and lover. This story was so popular that it became a common theme in Roman art and literature. Parents would literally name their sons after Ganymede, hoping they'd be fortunate enough to catch the attention of a powerful mentor. The goddess Cybele had priests called Galli, who were either eunuchs or transgender individuals who dressed and lived as women. These weren't marginalized figures. They were respected religious authorities who performed important ceremonies and held significant social status. Roman religion also included festivals like the Liberalia, where sexual norms were temporarily suspended, and people could engage in behaviors that would normally be restricted. It's like if Burning Man was a religious holiday that everyone participated in, complete with official government sanction. The decline. When Christianity changed everything. Here's where our story takes a dramatic turn. For the first few centuries of the Roman Empire, these sexual norms remained remarkably stable. But as Christianity began to gain influence, particularly after Emperor Constantine converted in the 4th century CE, everything started to change. Christian theology brought with it very different ideas about sexuality, marriage, and morality. The idea that sexual pleasure was inherently sinful, that marriage should be the only acceptable context for sexual activity, and that procreation was the primary purpose of sex, were revolutionary concepts in Roman society. It didn't happen overnight. Cultural change never does. But gradually, laws began to change. In 342 CE, Emperors Constantius II and Constans issued a law that appears to have criminalized male homosexual marriages. By 390 CE, Emperor Theodosius the had made passive homosexuality punishable by death. This wasn't just about changing personal behavior. It was about fundamentally restructuring Roman society around new moral principles. The mentor-student relationships that had been crucial for Roman education and political development were suddenly seen as corrupting influences. The sexual freedom that had been a mark of Roman civilization became a sign of moral decay. The modern parallel. What we can learn. As I wrap up this journey through ancient Roman sexuality, I want you to think about what this means for us today. Here was a civilization that conquered most of the known world, built incredible architecture that still stands today, created legal systems we still use, and produced literature we still read, all while maintaining sexual norms that were radically different from our own. The Romans prove that there's nothing natural or traditional about how we organize sexuality and relationships. These are cultural choices, and different societies have made very different choices throughout history. What's particularly striking is how the Roman approach focused on power dynamics and social roles rather than gender preferences. They cared more about who was in charge than about who was sleeping with whom. In some ways, that might have been more honest about the realities of human relationships than our modern tendency to categorize people into fixed identity groups. Of course, we shouldn't romanticize Roman society. It was built on slavery, conquest, and massive social inequality. The sexual freedom they enjoyed was largely reserved for free-born male citizens, while slaves and women had very little agency over their own bodies and lives. But the Roman example does show us that human sexuality is far more flexible and varied than we often assume. It reminds us that the categories we use to understand ourselves and others are products of our particular historical moment, not eternal truths. So the next time someone starts talking about traditional values, or the way things have always been, you can smile and think about Emperor Hadrian building a city for his boyfriend, or Julius Caesar learning politics in the bed of a mentor, or thousands of Roman men living full, successful lives while loving whoever they chose to love. History is messier, weirder, and more interesting than we usually admit. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it worth studying. Conclusion: the more things change. Ancient Rome shows us that human sexuality has always been complex, diverse, and culturally shaped. What seemed normal and natural to Romans would shock many people today, just as our modern attitudes would probably puzzle them. The key insight is that there's no single right way to organize human relationships. There are just different ways that different societies have chosen to structure love, sex, and power. The Romans got some things right and some things terribly wrong, just like every civilization. But their approach to sexuality reminds us that the categories we use to understand ourselves aren't fixed in stone. They're choices we make, and we can always choose differently. And that, my friends, is why studying history isn't just about understanding the past. It's about expanding our imagination for what the future might hold. So there you have it. A brief tour inside the sexual lives of Roman emperors and the normalization of homosexuality in ancient Rome. If you enjoyed learning about how normal homosexuality was back in my day, then please subscribe to this video, and you can join me in all the other episodes of Ancient Rome Revisited, where I guide you through the life and times of the people and the Republic of Rome. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.